The alien predators moved silently through the dense forest, their movements fluid and precise. They had hunted on dozens of planets, their skills unmatched. Their prey had always been beneath them, weak, predictable, easy to corner and kill. Today was no different. They had been tracking this human for hours, watching her every move from a distance. The thrill of the hunt was what drove them, and they were confident this would end like every other hunt. They observed her from the trees, her footsteps barely making a sound as she moved cautiously through the underbrush. She looked ordinary, small compared to the towering alien figures, armed with nothing more than basic tools. They had studied humans before. While resilient in their own way, they were hardly worthy opponents. This one, a lone female, was no exception. She had been separated from her group days ago, and they had been tracking her ever since. Isolated, tired, vulnerable, just the way they liked their prey. The lead predator signaled to the others, a low guttural sound that meant it was time to move in. Their cloaking technology kept them hidden, their advanced senses picking up every detail. The human had no idea they were there. The predator smiled, or at least what could be considered a smile for their kind. This would be a quick hunt. They would strike, capture her, toy with her for a while, and then finish it. They moved in closer, their steps calculated, careful not to alert her. She continued walking, unaware of the danger that crept just behind her. But something changed. She stopped suddenly. The predators halted in sync, watching closely. The human's head turned slightly, as if she had heard something. The predator narrowed its eyes. How could she have known? Their technology made them invisible, silent. She shouldn't have detected them, but there she was, standing still, listening intently. Without warning, the human changed her pace. She moved faster now, slipping through the trees with surprising agility. The predator leader frowned, issuing a new command. The hunt had just begun, and now the human was running. This was fine. It would only make the capture more exciting. They followed her easily at first, staying just out of sight, their forms blending into the surroundings. But the human wasn't panicking, not the way they expected. She wasn't stumbling or making mistakes. In fact, she seemed deliberate in her movements, like she knew exactly where she was going. Minutes passed, then hours. The human had led them deeper into the forest, and the predators began to feel a strange tension. They should have caught her by now. They should have cornered her, yet she kept moving, always staying just ahead. The leader clicked in frustration. How was she evading them? She had no technology, no weapons that they could see, but she was slipping through their grasp like sand. The human disappeared around a bend, and the predator leader ordered the group to spread out. They would surround her, leave no room for escape. The thrill of the chase was gone now, replaced by frustration. This hunt was taking too long. Suddenly, one of the predators froze. It felt something, a shift in the air, a presence that shouldn't be there. Before it could react, a sharp, brutal pain shot through its body. It looked down in shock. A trap. A simple, crude trap had impaled its leg, disabling it instantly. The predator roared in pain, its cloaking field flickering. The others heard the cry and rushed to its aid, but the human was already gone. The leader snarled, furious now. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were the hunters, not the hunted. How had she managed to set a trap without them noticing? The human was more resourceful than they'd anticipated, but it didn't matter. They would find her, and they would make her pay for this insult. They pressed on, more cautious now, their eyes scanning the environment for any more traps. The human had shown her hand, but she was still outmatched. The predators adjusted their strategy, using their advanced scanners to detect any more tricks she might have laid out. But the forest was thick, and the human knew it better than they did. Another hour passed, and still, she eluded them. They found signs of her, broken branches, faint footprints, but she was always one step ahead. The predators grew more frustrated with each passing minute. Then, just as they thought they had her, another trap was sprung. This one was even simpler, yet just as effective. One of the predators was caught, its foot snared in a rope that yanked it off the ground, hanging it upside down. The alien roared in fury, thrashing to free itself, but the more it struggled, the tighter the rope became. The leader stopped, realization dawning. This human wasn't running blindly. She was leading them. Leading them into traps, one by one. She was hunting them. The game had changed. The predators regrouped, their confidence shaken. The human was no longer just prey, she had become something more dangerous. They communicated silently, their movements more calculated now. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. This was a battle of wits. And they were losing. The human crouched low, her breath steady as she scanned the path ahead. She knew they were closing in, but she wasn't running anymore. She had them right where she wanted. What had started as a fight for survival had turned into something else. Now, she was the one setting the rules. The hunters had become the hunted, and they still didn't fully grasp what they were up against. They were moving slower now, more careful. She could sense their hesitation. They weren't used to this, being outmaneuvered. They had always relied on their superior technology, their sheer strength, to dominate any situation. But none of that mattered here. Not in this environment, not against her. She had learned long ago that technology had its limits. Instinct and adaptability were what kept you alive. She moved silently, knowing exactly how to avoid making a sound, her years of training coming into play. The forest wasn't her natural home, but she had learned quickly. She used its shadows, its cover, to disappear when she needed. The aliens had no idea how well she could blend in, how she could use the terrain to her advantage. Each step she took, each move, was calculated. The predators were growing restless. They had spread out again, trying to flush her out. But she wasn't playing by their rules. She circled back, tracking them as they thought they were tracking her. She had already set her next move in motion. One of them moved into her line of sight unaware. He was scanning the area, his focus entirely on finding her trail. She stayed perfectly still, waiting. Then, in one swift motion, she struck, disarming him before he could even react. There was no noise, no struggle. The predator slumped to the ground, unconscious. She quickly took his weapon, examining it briefly. It was useless to her, too bulky, too complicated for what she needed. She discarded it and moved on. The others would soon realize one of their own had fallen, but that was part of the plan. She didn't need to take them all out at once. Fear and confusion were her real weapons now. She could hear them communicating, the slight hum of their devices as they tried to regroup. They were still underestimating her, still thinking they could contain the situation if they just found her quickly enough. She let them think that. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. She knew they were getting close to panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak, easy targets. But she had been preparing for something like this her whole life. She wasn't just some random person they had stumbled upon. They didn't know the kind of training she had gone through, the situations she had survived before. She wasn't going to die here, not at their hands. Another predator stepped into view, searching. She watched him carefully. He was moving too fast, too focused on finding her, not on his surroundings. She had already set a trap in this area, and within moments he was caught. A net snapped up, hoisting him into the air, struggling against the tight cords. She watched him for a second, ensuring he wasn't going to get free, then slipped back into the shadows. Their numbers were dwindling, but they hadn't yet realized how close they were to losing. They still thought they had the upper hand, still believed they could turn this around. But she knew better. Every trap she set, every move she made, was pushing them closer to defeat. She could hear their leader now, barking out orders, trying to regain control. It was almost laughable. He thought he could restore order, thought he could bring this hunt back to what it had been. He was wrong. They had lost the moment they thought she was just prey. She moved again, keeping low, avoiding the paths she knew they would scan. She didn't need to engage them directly. That wasn't her style. She would let them make the mistakes. They were already panicking, and panic led to carelessness. Hours passed, and the predators were down to just a few. They had become desperate, their movements erratic. The leader was the only one still trying to keep his composure, but even he was showing signs of wear. They had lost the advantage, and he knew it. Now, he was just trying to get them out alive. She wasn't going to let that happen. Her final trap was set. She lured them into a clearing, a place she had scouted earlier. It was perfect, dense enough to conceal her but open enough to make them feel exposed. The leader entered first, his weapon drawn, scanning the area. His last remaining hunters followed, their nerves on edge. That's when she struck. The leader paused, his instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. He motioned for the others to slow down, but it was too late. One of them triggered a hidden trap, a sharp, snapping sound followed by a pained roar. The predator fell, caught by a snare that yanked him into the air, hanging helplessly. The leader's eyes widened in disbelief. How had she managed to set so many traps without them detecting her? They were supposed to be the apex hunters, yet here they were, being picked off one by one. He cursed silently, pulling back into a defensive stance, scanning the area for any sign of her. The remaining hunter stood rigid beside him, equally shaken but trying to maintain focus. The leader felt the weight of the situation pressing down. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was survival, and the human was winning. He tried to calm himself, breathing deeply, but the reality was undeniable. They had underestimated her from the start. This human wasn't prey, she was a predator in her own right, and she had been leading them into this trap from the moment they began the chase. The remaining hunter made a sudden movement, firing into the trees. The shots echoed, but nothing followed. Silence. The leader scowled, knowing that their desperation was clouding their judgment. She wouldn't reveal herself so easily, not when she had the upper hand. He had to think, had to regain control of the situation before it was too late. But even as he tried to strategize, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was already several steps ahead. Every decision he made, she had already anticipated. Every trap they disarmed, there was another waiting for them. It was maddening. He had never experienced anything like this before, and it was pushing him closer to the edge. He knew they were running out of time. His wounded comrade still struggled in the snare, his low growls barely masking his agony. The leader considered freeing him but realized it would take too long, and every second they stayed in one place made them more vulnerable. He glanced around, making a decision. They had to move, had to break out of this cycle of traps and regain some distance. But deep down, he knew that any move they made, she would be ready for it. As they started to retreat, there was another snap. The last remaining hunter fell to the ground, a silent dart embedded in his neck. The leader spun around, but it was already too late. His second-in-command was down, his body limp as the tranquilizer took hold. The leader stared at the fallen alien, panic finally creeping into his mind. She had taken them all down, systematically, without a single direct confrontation. He was alone now. The realization hit him hard. The mighty predator, the one who had led countless hunts across the galaxy, was now the hunted. It was a fate he had never considered possible. His pride had blinded him to the reality that this human was far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. A sound, a rustle in the bushes, caught his attention. He spun, weapon ready, but saw nothing. The forest had grown eerily quiet, the silence suffocating. He knew she was there, somewhere, watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His heart raced, his breathing uneven as he tried to anticipate her next move. He had to end this, had to take control of the situation before it spiraled further out of his grasp. He was a warrior, trained for combat, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. With a snarl, he activated his last resort, a high-pitched tracking signal that should disrupt any cloaking or hiding devices she might have. But as the signal pulsed through the air, nothing happened. No movement, no reaction. She was already too close, too prepared. The leader's pulse quickened. He could feel her presence, like a shadow creeping in from all sides, suffocating him. This was no longer a battle of strength or skill. It was psychological. She had broken them down piece by piece, stripping away their confidence, their arrogance. A twig snapped behind him, and he turned too late. She was there, swift and silent, like a phantom in the trees. He barely registered the blur of motion before he felt the sharp pain of her strike. His weapon clattered to the ground as he staggered back, clutching his side. She didn't give him time to recover, moving in again with precision. This was her world now, and she was in complete control. The leader stumbled, his vision blurring as the pain intensified. He tried to reach for his communicator, for any last hope of calling for help, but it was futile. She was relentless, and in that moment, he knew that she had won. This wasn't just survival for her, it was victory. She had turned the hunt around, made them feel the fear they had inflicted on countless others. As his strength faded, the leader's last thought was not of defeat, but of realization. Humans, they were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He had been wrong, and it had cost him everything. The darkness closed in, and the hunt was over. The leader's body hit the ground with a heavy thud. She stood over him, calm, steady, her breathing controlled. The fight was over, but she wasn't done. She knew better than to assume this was the end. Caution had been her greatest ally, and she wasn't about to let her guard down now. She moved swiftly through the clearing, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any movement, any sign that one of the remaining hunters might still be out there. But all she saw were the traps she had laid, the bodies of the aliens who had fallen into them, and the faint signs of struggle in the dirt where they had tried to resist. Everything had played out just as she planned. With a methodical precision, she began collecting anything of value from the fallen. Their technology could be useful, though she wasn't sure how much of it would function without the specific alien interfaces. Still, it was better to take what she could. Anything to gain an edge in case more of them came. Her movements were quick, efficient. She didn't allow herself to linger on the victory. There was no time for celebration, no room for relief. She knew how quickly things could turn, how fast a situation could change. One moment you were in control, the next you were fighting for your life. She had lived through enough to understand that. As she worked, her mind replayed the events of the last few days. She had been tracking their movements from the moment she realized they were following her. At first, it had been about survival, staying one step ahead, avoiding their traps, keeping herself alive. But the more she studied them, the more she understood their tactics, their arrogance. And that's when everything shifted. She hadn't just been surviving anymore. She had started hunting them. It wasn't about revenge. No, she didn't care about that. This was about proving something, both to herself and to them. They had thought her weak, easy prey. But they had misjudged her. She had spent her life preparing for moments like this, honing her instincts, learning how to adapt in any situation. She had been underestimated before, and each time, she came out stronger. This was no different. The predators had relied too much on their technology, their belief in their own superiority. They hadn't anticipated that a human could think like they did, could fight like they did. But that's where they had gone wrong. Humans weren't predictable. They could be unpredictable, relentless. They could turn fear into fuel, and desperation into determination. She finished gathering what she needed and stood up, glancing one last time at the clearing. The quiet of the forest had returned, but it felt different now, almost eerie. The silence wasn't just from the lack of movement, it was the aftermath of a battle, a reminder of what had transpired here. She didn't linger. There was no point in staying any longer than necessary. She had won, but victory didn't mean safety. More could be coming, and she needed to be prepared for that. This wasn't just a one-time event. The hunt could resume at any moment. As she made her way through the forest, her mind remained sharp, her body alert. She wasn't just walking to escape. She was already planning her next moves, already thinking of what she would need to do if more of them arrived. This was her life now, always ready, always on guard. But even as she moved forward, there was a small sense of satisfaction growing inside her. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper, something more personal. She had proven herself. Not to them, not to the predators who had underestimated her. But to herself. She had faced what they believed to be unbeatable odds, and she had not only survived, she had won. There was a power in that, a strength that she carried with her now. It wasn't just physical strength, though she had certainly demonstrated that. It was the strength of knowing that no matter what came next, no matter how dangerous or difficult the challenge, she would find a way. She always had, and she always would. The forest began to thin out as she neared the edge, and the open sky came into view. She stopped for a moment, looking out at the landscape beyond. The horizon stretched out before her, vast and unknown. There could be more dangers out there. She didn't know what was waiting. But that didn't matter. She had become something more than just prey, more than just a survivor. She was the hunter now. And if anything else came for her, she would be ready. She would always be ready. With a final glance back at the forest, she moved forward, her steps sure and unwavering. She wasn't running anymore. She was walking into whatever came next, confident, prepared. The hunt wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, she was the one setting the rules. She stood at the edge of the forest, the open landscape stretching before her. The air was still, and the quiet of the aftermath hung heavy around her. She could feel it, the shift. The moment when everything had changed, when she had taken control of the hunt. But she didn't dwell on it. There was no need to. What mattered now was what came next. She moved with purpose, her senses still sharp, scanning the horizon. The predators had been relentless, but she knew better than to assume it was over. If there were more of them, they would come, and they would come smarter, more prepared. She needed to stay ahead, stay vigilant. There was no room for complacency. As she walked, her mind remained focused on survival. The alien technology she had gathered weighed lightly in her pack. Some of it was unfamiliar, strange, but she would figure it out. She always did. She didn't have their level of advancement, but she had something more important: adaptability. Where they relied on tools and gadgets, she relied on her instincts, her ability to learn and change with every new challenge. They had thought her fragile, assumed that their superior weapons would be enough to break her. They hadn't understood that humanity's strength didn't come from what was in their hands but from what was in their minds. Humans could endure. They could suffer, adapt, and emerge stronger from every battle, every hardship. And that was what the predators had failed to grasp. She reached a high point, overlooking the terrain below. Her eyes scanned the distance, watching for any sign of movement, any indication that more were coming. Nothing yet, but she wouldn't let her guard down. She had made that mistake once, and it had cost her. She wouldn't make it again. The landscape below was vast, the wilderness stretching out like an endless expanse. It should have felt overwhelming, but to her, it felt like opportunity. Every challenge, every obstacle, was something she could overcome. She had proven that, not just to the predators but to herself. And now, she would use that knowledge to survive whatever came next. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, but not letting it slow her. There was no time for hesitation, no time to reflect on what had been. There was only forward, only the path ahead. She had come too far to stop now. As she descended the ridge, she felt a sense of clarity. The forest behind her had been a battleground, a place where she had fought to survive. But it was also where she had become something more. She had learned how to fight on her terms, how to outthink an enemy that had always considered itself superior. She had taken their arrogance and used it against them. And that was the lesson she would carry with her, never to underestimate what others might see as weakness. Humans had always been underestimated, thought of as fragile, but it was that very perception that gave them their greatest strength. The predators hadn't seen the threat until it was too late. They hadn't understood that humans didn't just survive, they fought, they adapted, they thrived. She walked with steady, even steps, her eyes still alert. She knew that more challenges would come, more predators, more hunts. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The tools she had gathered would help, but they weren't what would save her. It was her mind, her resilience, that would keep her alive. And that was something no alien technology could match. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. She kept moving, her pace unhurried but determined. There was no destination in mind, no safe place to head toward. There didn't need to be. The only thing that mattered was staying ahead, staying prepared. Every step she took was part of the hunt, even now. Every move calculated, every thought focused. As the night began to fall, she found a small rise to rest on, her back to the rocks. She sat, but her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Even in rest, she remained vigilant. She had learned the hard way that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about being ready for the fight at any moment. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the predators. They had come for her, confident in their superiority, certain that she was nothing more than prey. They had been wrong. And now, she knew they wouldn't be the last. Others would follow, whether from their kind or something else entirely. It didn't matter. Because now she was more than prey. She was the hunter. She was the one setting the traps, choosing the battlegrounds. And if anything came for her, they would find themselves in the same position as those that had fallen behind her. They would discover too late that the human they thought so easy to defeat was already steps ahead, waiting for them to make the first mistake. She leaned back slightly, her eyes still scanning the horizon. The hunt wasn't over. It might never be over. But that was fine. She was ready. Whatever came next, whatever new threat rose against her, she would face it head on. She wasn't afraid of the fight. She welcomed it. And when they came for her again, she would be waiting, not as prey, but as the one who had already learned how to turn the tables. She had become the hunter.